Welcome back to today's Chrissy B Show, everybody. So now we're going to be discussing childhood and teen trauma with our resident psychologist, Dr. Audrey Tang. Welcome to the show, Audrey.
Thanks for having me, Chrissy.
So what would you say are the typical types of trauma that children and teens go through?
It's important to remember that we don't always know how children process a lot of things. And so generally life may throw things at us that we're not quite sure how that child is seeing it in their own mind and what they're doing to work through it. So it might be things like divorce or relationships breaking up. Grief is another thing, loss of pets or loss of things that they're close to. So if the parent is moving house, that can be also difficult for a child to be able to cope with. So life unfortunately throws up a few things which may affect the parent to the point where the parent is not as available as they'd like to be to really support that child all the way through. And that can result in the child developing strategies in order to cope with them, but we don't necessarily know how healthy those strategies are until later life. Then you've, of course, got the more malicious, targeted behaviours, so abuse, grooming, those sorts of things, which, of course, can have horrible effects on a child because you don't know how that's going to affect their self-esteem, their self-worth, their value, and the deeper parts of their core. Of course, unfortunately, society also changes now, and we're in a comparison culture where social media is a real problem. Other issues can be that simply if a friend is having a party and they're inviting a whole class, well then do you do it? But what if your parents can't afford it? Then that can cause problems for the child as well. They're being brought up in a world where consumerism, marketing, it's a lot bigger than it ever was in the past. And on top of that, we can also affect a child by not validating how they feel. Now, no one means to affect them in this particular way, but it might be something as simple as an adult, we know a child may fall out with a friend and then the next day it's all blown over and it's absolutely fine. But in saying to the child, oh, don't worry about it, it will all blow over tomorrow, we haven't actually validated what that child is feeling right now is real.
And it's a big deal for them.
It's painful, yes. And what they might then begin to think is, oh, so my feelings aren't important. And again, this can build up survival strategies. And one of those might be, oh, I ought not to express my feelings because they're not worth listening to or they're not worth exploring. And if an adult then continues with those behaviours, they may restrict themselves from expressing themselves in relationships. They may always try and put the other person first, which is very nice and compassionate. But if they're doing it at the expense of their own value and their own selves, that can be a real problem.
How can things be turned around then, do you think?
Well, largely, if there is certainly a problem such as abuse or anything a bit more targeted or sinister, then it's hugely important to speak with a professional. That's incredibly important because then the child can work through a lot of things and they can work through them sometimes on their own, or rather the young adult can work through things on their own. Sometimes tools like mindfulness or just being a little bit more aware of, oh, I didn't realise I engaged in that particular behaviour. Now why am I doing it? Does it still benefit me? And if it doesn't, what can I do instead? Some of the time we maintain strategies that we've built up to survive, such as don't trust anyone. And we're no longer in that context of being that child who is desperately unhappy or that child who is crying out for someone to be consistent and give them that consistent love. And therefore keeping those strategies going is unhealthy. So sometimes it's about recognising, I'm doing this, is it beneficial to me? That's a good question to ask yourself. What am I benefiting from this? And then what are the alternatives that I can use? Unfortunately, we can't shield as much as we'd love to protect people and children, and we ourselves might wish to protect our own children or people we care for from heartache or from breakups or from the natural cycle of life, which of course brings death as well. But again, in being able to talk through it, get the appropriate counselling, to know that they're not alone, to know that it's not strange, that can help too. So our own attitude can model that to the child too. So there's lots of different things that we can do, but we also just need to look out for what we're saying and what we might say as a throwaway comment or we may mean well, because that can really affect that child as they grow up too.
Audrey, thank you so much. My pleasure. And we'll see you again next week.
Yes.
Thank you.